The frozen wasteland of Kalos Prime stretched endlessly under twin moons, its crystalline surface reflecting pale light like a sea of broken mirrors. Lieutenant Jake Morrison adjusted his thermal visor and checked his squad's positions through the comlink. 6 soldiers moved in perfect formation across the treacherous ice fields, their breath forming small clouds that instantly crystallized in the -40 atmosphere. "Thermal sweep complete, sir," came the voice of Corporal Davies through the static. "No heat signatures detected in the target zone." Jake nodded, his eyes scanning the jagged ice formations ahead. This was supposed to be a routine reconnaissance mission. Map the terrain, check for enemy installations, and report back. Simple enough for an elite unit like theirs. But something felt wrong. The silence was too complete, too perfect. Behind him, Sergeant Kira Thane moved with predatory grace, her 7-foot frame cutting through the frigid air like a blade. Her reptilian heritage showed in the scales that ran along her jaw and the back of her hands, though her mostly human appearance had made her integration into the human military possible. Her yellow eyes, evolved for her species' nocturnal hunting, constantly swept their surroundings with an intensity that made even seasoned soldiers nervous. "Movement, 3 o'clock." Kira's voice cut through the calm with clinical precision. No emotion, no warmth, just facts. Her people, the Therian, had trained emotion out of their warriors centuries ago. Weakness was death in their culture. Jake raised his weapon, following her gaze to a cluster of ice spires. "I don't see." The world exploded. Energy bolts screamed through the air from hidden positions, turning the peaceful landscape into a killing field. The first shot took Davies in the chest, his body crumpling onto the ice with a wet thud. The second caught Martinez in the shoulder, spinning him around before a follow-up shot finished him. "Ambush. Take cover," Jake shouted, diving behind a low ice ridge as superheated plasma melted the ground where he'd been standing. His heart hammered against his ribs as he tried to process what was happening. This was supposed to be uninhabited territory. The firefight lasted only minutes, but it felt like hours. Jake watched helplessly as his squad was systematically eliminated by an enemy that seemed to know exactly where they were. Thompson, Rodriguez, and Paddle, all gone in flashes of light, and screams cut short by the vacuum of space. When the firing stopped, only Jake and Kira remained, pressed against opposite sides of an ice boulder. Jake's breathing was ragged, his suit's environmental systems working overtime to process his panicked gasps. Across the gap, Kira remained motionless, her weapon trained on the enemy positions. "Status report," Jake whispered into his comm. "4 hostiles confirmed down." Kira replied, her voice unchanged despite the carnage around them. "Unknown number remain in the spire formation. You are injured." Jake looked down and felt his blood run cold. A jagged piece of ice, propelled by an energy blast, had torn through his survival suit just below his left shoulder. Dark red blood was already seeping through the breach, and he could feel the killing cold of Kalos Prime beginning to seep in. "Suit integrity compromised," he reported, trying to keep his voice steady. 15 minutes until hypothermia sets in." Kira's yellow eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. For a moment, something flickered across her reptilian features, something that looked almost like concern. But Therian warriors didn't feel concern. They felt only duty. "We need to move," she said, rising from cover with fluid grace. "There will be more." Jake tried to stand and stumbled, his vision blurring as blood loss and cold began to take their toll. The frozen ground rushed up to meet him, and he felt Kira's powerful hands catch him before he hit the ice. "Lieutenant Morrison." Her voice was closer now, and he could hear something in it he'd never heard before. Uncertainty. "Jake." It was the first time she'd ever used his first name. Jake's world had narrowed to the spreading warmth of his own blood against the killing cold of Kalos Prime. Each breath sent crystalline daggers through his lungs, and he could feel his body's core temperature dropping with terrifying speed. The breach in his survival suit was a death sentence, one that would claim him in minutes, not hours. Kira knelt beside him, her yellow eyes scanning his wounds with clinical precision. Her scaled hands moved across his chest, assessing the damage with the efficiency of a field medic. But Jake could see something else in her expression, something that went beyond tactical assessment. "The puncture is too large for standard field repair," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Your suit's thermal regulation is compromised. Blood loss is severe." Jake tried to speak, but his teeth were already chattering uncontrollably. He managed to whisper, "Leave me. Get to the extraction point." Kira's eyes flashed with something fierce and alien. "No." Without hesitation, she began tearing at her own uniform. The reinforced fabric of her combat suit was designed to withstand plasma fire and extreme temperatures, but her claws made short work of it. Jake watched in stunned silence as she methodically destroyed her own protection against the lethal environment. "Kira, what are you doing?" he gasped, his vision blurring. "You'll freeze to death." "My biology can withstand the cold longer than yours," she replied, ripping away another section of her sleeve. The pale scales along her arms gleamed in the moonlight, and Jake could see her skin was already taking on a bluish tinge. But not forever. She packed the torn fabric against his wound, her movements swift and sure. The pressure sent waves of agony through his body, but he could feel the bleeding slow. Then she took larger sections of her uniform, pieces that had been protecting her torso and legs, and began sealing the breach in his suit. "This is insane," Jake protested weakly. "Your people don't." "My people believe strength comes from standing alone," Kira interrupted, her breath forming larger clouds as her body temperature began to drop. "But I have learned that some strength comes from choosing not to." She worked with desperate efficiency, using the torn fabric and her own body heat to create a makeshift seal. When she pressed her bare hand against the breach, Jake could feel the warmth from her alien physiology flowing into him. It was like touching a living furnace. "There," she said, but her voice was already becoming strained. "Temporary seal. We need shelter." Jake looked at her with new eyes. Half of her uniform was gone, leaving patches of scaled skin exposed to the killing cold. She was sacrificing her own survival for his, and it went against everything he knew about Therian culture. "Why?" he whispered. Kira's yellow eyes met his, and for the first time since he'd known her, he saw vulnerability there. "Because you matter," she said simply. She hauled him to his feet with surprising gentleness, supporting most of his weight as they stumbled toward a formation of collapsed ice caves. The wind was picking up, carrying with it the promise of an even more brutal night ahead. They found shelter in a narrow crevice between two fallen ice sheets. It was barely large enough for both of them, forcing them into close proximity. Kira settled Jake against the back wall, then pressed herself against him, sharing what remained of her body heat. "Your suit's heating system is damaged," she observed, her scientific mind still functioning despite her deteriorating condition. "We must share warmth directly." Jake felt her arms encircle him, drawing him against her chest. Even through his damaged suit, he could feel the alien heat of her body, different from human warmth, but no less comforting. Her heart beat with a rhythm unlike his own, steady and strong. "Kira," he said, his voice muffled against her shoulder. "I never thanked you." "Do not thank me yet," she replied, though he could hear the exhaustion creeping into her voice. "We still have to survive the night." Outside their makeshift shelter, the wind howled like a living thing, and Jake could swear he heard distant sounds. The crunch of boots on ice, the mechanical whir of search equipment. Their enemies were still out there, hunting. But for now, wrapped in the warmth of an alien warrior who had chosen to save him at the cost of her own life, Jake felt something he hadn't expected to feel again: hope. The ice cave had become their world, a pocket of shared warmth in an ocean of killing cold. Jake drifted in and out of consciousness, his body fighting the dual threats of blood loss and hypothermia. Each time he woke, Kira was there, her arms wrapped around him, her alien heat keeping death at bay. "Stay with me," she whispered during one of his more lucid moments. Her voice had lost its usual stoic control, replaced by something raw and desperate. "Jake, stay with me." He tried to focus on her face in the dim light. Her scales had taken on a darker hue, and her breathing was becoming labored. The cold was taking its toll on her too, despite her superior biology. "I'm sorry," he mumbled, his words slurred. "This is my fault." "The mission." "No," Kira said firmly, her hands tightening around him. "You could not have known. None of us could." Jake felt himself slipping again, the warmth of her body the only anchor keeping him from drifting away entirely. In his delirium, old barriers crumbled, and words spilled out that he'd never intended to speak. "I used to watch you," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "During training, during missions, you were so perfect, so strong. I never thought someone like you could." "Could what?" Kira asked, her breath warm against his ear. "Could care about someone like me." The words came out in a rush, vulnerability bleeding through his usual military composure. "I'm just human. Weak. Fragile." Kira was quiet for a long moment, and Jake feared he'd overstepped some invisible line. Then she spoke, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it. "On my world, showing weakness means death," she said. "We are taught from birth that emotion is a luxury that gets warriors killed. But watching you lead, watching you care for your soldiers, I learned that what my people call weakness might actually be strength." Jake felt her hand move to his face, her scaled fingers tracing the line of his jaw with unexpected tenderness. "You are not weak, Jake Morrison," she continued. "You are the strongest human I have ever known. Not because you do not feel fear, but because you feel it and act anyway. Not because you do not love your soldiers, but because you love them and lead them still." He turned his head to look at her, seeing her yellow eyes gleaming in the darkness. "Kira, I have never felt for anyone what I feel for you," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind outside. "My people would call it madness. But if this is madness, then I choose it willingly." The space between them seemed to shrink, and Jake found himself drawn to her like a moth to flame. When their lips met, it was like touching fire and ice simultaneously, her alien heat against his cooling skin, her strange but beautiful features becoming the most familiar thing in his world. The kiss was desperate, hungry, born of the knowledge that they might not survive the night. But it was also tender, filled with all the words they'd never spoken and might never get the chance to say. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard, their shared breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. "I love you," Jake said, the words falling from his lips with surprising ease. "I know it's crazy, I know we're from different worlds, but—" Kira silenced him with another kiss, this one softer, more sure. "I love you too," she said against his lips. "In my language, we have a word. Thigel. It means heart-bonded. It is what warriors call their closest battle partners. But I think it means something more." She pulled him closer, and Jake could feel the steady rhythm of her dual hearts against his chest. Her body was cooling, but her determination remained fierce. "We will survive this," she said, her voice taking on the commanding tone he knew so well. "We will survive because we are stronger together than apart, because what we have found here is worth fighting for." Outside, the wind continued to howl, and Jake could hear the distant sounds of their pursuers growing closer. But wrapped in Kira's arms, feeling her love surround him like armor, he believed her words. They would fight, they would survive, and they would do it together. "Promise me," he whispered, his strength fading again. "Promise me that if we get out of this—" "When we get out of this," Kira corrected firmly. "When we get out of this," Jake agreed. "Promise me we'll find a way to make this work, whatever it takes." Kira's embrace tightened around him, and he felt her lips press against his forehead in a gesture so tender it made his chest ache. "I promise," she whispered, "on my honor as a warrior, on my love for you, I promise. As consciousness faded again, Jake held onto those words like a lifeline, letting them carry him through the darkness toward whatever dawn might bring. Jake woke to pale light filtering through the ice walls of their shelter and the sound of Kira's labored breathing. Her skin had taken on an alarming blue-white pallor, and her usually bright yellow eyes were dim with exhaustion. She had given so much of her own heat to keep him alive that her superior biology was finally succumbing to the cold. "Kira," he whispered, his voice stronger than it had been in hours. The makeshift bandages had held, and while he was still weak from blood loss, the immediate crisis had passed. "How long?" "6 hours," she replied, her words coming slowly. "Dawn is breaking. Your condition has stabilized." Jake struggled to sit up, wincing at the pain in his shoulder. "What about you?" "I will manage," she said, but he could see the lie in her eyes. Her hands were shaking, something he'd never seen from the unflappable Therian warrior. Outside their shelter, Jake could hear new sounds: the systematic crunch of boots on ice, the electronic beeping of scanning equipment, voices speaking in a harsh alien language he didn't recognize. "They found us," Kira said, her military training overriding her physical distress. "Multiple contacts. They are conducting a grid search." Jake checked his sidearm. Still functional, though low on charge. Kira's rifle lay beside them, its power cell depleted from the previous battle. They had maybe enough firepower for one more fight, but in their weakened condition, it would likely be their last. "You need to go," Jake said, struggling to his feet. "I can hold them off long enough for you to reach the extraction point." Kira's eyes flashed with something between anger and disbelief. "You cannot stand without assistance, and you think to fight alone." "I won't let you die for me," Jake said firmly. "Not after everything you've sacrificed. And I will not abandon the man I love to face death alone," Kira replied, rising with visible effort. Despite her weakened state, she still towered over him, still commanded respect. "We fight together, or we die together. Those are the only choices I will accept." The conviction in her voice sent a surge of strength through Jake's battered body. This was the warrior he'd fallen in love with, fierce, determined, unbreakable even in the face of impossible odds. "Together, then," he agreed, checking his weapon one final time. They could hear their pursuers getting closer, harsh voices coordinating the search, the whine of energy weapons charging. Jake counted at least 6 distinct voices, possibly more. "Jake," Kira said softly, turning to face him. Her hands cupped his face with infinite gentleness. "Before we do this, I need you to know, these hours with you have been the most alive I have ever felt. Whatever happens, I regret nothing." "I love you," Jake replied, pulling her down for what might be their last kiss. It was fierce and desperate, full of all the promises they might never get to keep. "I love you too," she whispered against his lips. "In this life, and whatever comes after." The first enemy soldier appeared at the mouth of their cave, his weapon raised. Jake and Kira moved as one, their bodies finding perfect synchronization despite their injuries. Jake's shot took the soldier's center mass, while Kira's claws found another target who had tried to flank them. The battle was short but vicious. Jake fought with desperate precision, each shot carefully placed to conserve ammunition. Kira fought like a force of nature, her weakened body somehow finding reserves of strength in her determination to protect him. When the shooting stopped, 4 enemy soldiers lay dead, but Jake could hear more approaching. His ammunition was exhausted, and Kira was bleeding from a grazing shot to her arm. "That's not all of them," Jake said, his breathing ragged. "No," Kira agreed, reloading her last power cell with practiced efficiency. "But we have cost them dearly. They will be more cautious now." Suddenly, a new sound cut through the air, the distinctive whine of military transport engines. Jake's heart leaped as he recognized the sound of human aircraft. "Extraction team," he breathed, hardly daring to believe it. Kira's comm unit crackled to life with a familiar voice. "This is Rescue 1 to any surviving members of Recon 7. Please respond." Jake grabbed the communicator with shaking hands. "This is Lieutenant Morrison. 2 survivors, wounded, under enemy fire. Grid reference Tango 77. Copy that. Lieutenant, we have you on thermal. Hang tight. We're coming in hot." The next few minutes were a blur of explosions and gunfire as the rescue team engaged the remaining enemy forces. Jake and Kira huddled together in their shelter, listening to the battle rage outside. When silence finally fell, it was broken by human voices calling their names. "Here," Jake shouted. "We're here." 2 soldiers appeared at the cave entrance, their faces breaking into relieved grins when they saw the survivors. "Well, I'll be damned," one of them said. "Lieutenant Morrison, Sergeant Thane. Command's been looking for you for 8 hours." As they were helped from their shelter, Jake kept one arm around Kira, supporting her as much as she was supporting him. They had survived the night, survived the cold, survived their enemies. But as they were loaded onto the transport, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that their real challenges were just beginning. 3 weeks later, Jake sat in the medical bay of the orbital station orbiting Kalos Prime, his shoulder finally free from the regeneration matrix that had been rebuilding the damaged tissue. The doctors had done excellent work. He would carry only a small scar as a reminder of that night on the frozen moon. Kira sat beside his bed, her own injuries healed with the remarkable efficiency of Therian biology. Her scales had returned to their normal lustrous color, and her yellow eyes held their usual sharp intelligence. But something fundamental had changed between them, something that both thrilled and terrified Jake in equal measure. "The debriefing went well," she said, reviewing the datapad in her hands. "Command has accepted our report. The enemy presence on Kalos Prime has been eliminated." Jake nodded, but his attention was focused on more personal matters. "What about the other thing?" Kira's expression grew more serious. She set down the datapad and met his eyes directly. "I have submitted my request for transfer to the Mixed Species Integration Program. It will allow me to continue serving while exploring new possibilities." The integration program was the military's answer to the growing number of interspecies relationships forming between human and alien soldiers. It was controversial, opposed by traditionalists on both sides, but it offered couples like them a chance to serve together officially. "And your family?" Jake asked quietly. He knew that Kira's decision would not be received well by her clan on the Therian homeworld. "My brother contacted me yesterday," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "He says I have brought shame to our bloodline, that I have chosen weakness over strength." Jake felt anger flare in his chest, but Kira continued before he could speak. "I told him that I have learned the difference between weakness and vulnerability, that I have found a strength in caring for another that I never knew existed, that the human I love is the bravest warrior I have ever known." What did he say to that? Kira's lips curved in what might have been a smile. "He said I was no longer his sister. I told him that was his loss, not mine." Jake reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers. Her scales felt warm against his skin, no longer the desperate heat of shared survival, but something comfortable and right. "I'm sorry," he said. "Do not be," Kira replied firmly. "I have chosen my path. I have chosen you. I regret nothing." A knock at the door interrupted them, and Commander Patricia Wells entered the medical bay. She was a stern woman with graying hair and the no-nonsense bearing of a career officer, but her expression was surprisingly warm. "Lieutenant Morrison, Sergeant Thane," she said, offering a crisp salute. "How are you feeling?" "Much better, sir," Jake replied, returning the salute from his seated position. Commander Wells activated a privacy screen around Jake's bed, then sat down across from them. "I wanted to speak with both of you about your future assignments." Jake and Kira exchanged glances. This conversation would determine whether they had a future together in the military. "Your performance on Kalos Prime was exemplary," Wells continued. "Your survival against impossible odds, your tactical decision-making under extreme duress, and your mutual support have not gone unnoticed." She paused, studying them both carefully. The integration program has approved your applications. If you both accept, you will be assigned to the Frontier Defense Corps as a specialized reconnaissance team. The work will be dangerous, often involving long deployments to hostile worlds. We accept, Jake and Kira said simultaneously, then looked at each other and laughed. Wells smiled, the first time Jake had ever seen her do so. I thought you might. Your first assignment begins in 6 weeks. Use the time wisely. After the commander left, Jake and Kira sat in comfortable silence, holding hands and watching the stars through the medical bay's viewport. Kalos Prime was visible in the distance, its frozen surface gleaming like a jewel. Are you sure about this? Jake asked finally, giving up everything for someone you met in combat. Kira turned to look at him, her yellow eyes bright with something that looked like joy. I am not giving up anything, she said. I am gaining everything. On that frozen moon, I learned that the strongest bonds are forged not in comfort, but in adversity. That love is not weakness, it is the greatest strength of all. She leaned over and kissed him softly, her lips warm against his. Besides, she added with a hint of her old warrior's pride, someone needs to keep you alive on these dangerous missions. Jake laughed, pulling her closer. Is that your professional opinion, Sergeant? It is my personal promise, Lieutenant, she replied, her voice filled with love and determination. For as long as you will have me. Forever then, Jake said, meaning every word. Outside the viewport, the stars wheeled in their ancient dance, and somewhere among them lay new worlds to explore, new dangers to face, new adventures to share. But Jake wasn't afraid anymore. Whatever the universe might throw at them, they would face it together. After all, they had already survived the ultimate test, the frozen hell of Kalos Prime, where a warrior had torn off her uniform to save the man she loved, and in doing so, had discovered that the greatest victories were not won alone, but together. The future stretched out before them, bright with possibility and warmed by love.